The night was still, broken only by the distant hum of the city beyond the forest. The air smelled of damp earth, and the leaves trembled under the weight of the wind. Isaac stood near the lake, his reflection rippling on the water's surface as he gazed up at the stars. He had always felt drawn to the unknown, to the vastness beyond Earth's sky, but he never expected the unknown to come to him. Presence stirred behind him. It wasn't the sound of footsteps, nothing so ordinary. It was quieter, like a shift in the air, like something displacing the space itself. Isaac turned, his pulse steady but alert. She stood there, barely a few feet away. Her form was humanoid but undeniably alien. Silvery blue skin shimmered faintly beneath the moonlight, her long, flowing hair moving as though it had a life of its own. Her eyes large, luminous, with a depth that seemed endless, locked onto his, unblinking, analyzing. She was beautiful in a way that defied human understanding, but there was something else in her posture, something hesitant. She tilted her head, her voice a whisper against the silence. "Everyone is afraid of me. But why aren't you?" Isaac exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of her question. He had heard rumors, sightings of a strange figure lurking near the woods. The town spoke of it in hushed voices. Warnings passed around like ghost stories. No one dared to approach. No one stayed out after dark. But he had come unafraid. "I don't see a reason to be," he said simply. Her brow furrowed slightly. "You should be. Your kind fears what they do not understand." Isaac studied her carefully. Fear and understanding don't have to be opposites. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she stepped closer, her bare feet making no sound against the earth. He could see the faint patterns on her skin now, like intricate markings that pulsed with a soft light. She wasn't just watching him. She was searching for something. "You are different," she murmured, her voice carrying an odd mixture of curiosity and caution. Isaac shrugged. "I guess I am." A silence stretched between them, neither awkward nor empty. It was thick with something unspoken, a kind of connection neither of them fully understood yet. Then, as if testing a theory, she lifted her hand and extended it toward him. Her fingers were long and elegant, her skin smooth but radiating a warmth that surprised him. Isaac hesitated only for a moment before he reached out, letting his palm meet hers. The moment they touched, a rush of sensation coursed through him. Not painful, not frightening, just new. His mind buzzed with something foreign yet familiar, as if a hidden part of him had been awakened. He saw flashes, stars collapsing into nebulae, strange landscapes bathed in colors his eyes had never perceived before. But more than that, he felt her. Loneliness, exile, the weight of being feared. She pulled back sharply, as if realizing too late what she had done. "You!" Isaac steadied himself, breathing heavily, but he didn't let go of her hand. His grip tightened just enough to reassure her. "You're alone," he said, the words coming from somewhere deeper than just observation. "You've been alone for a long time." She looked away as if ashamed. "It is easier that way, is it?" Her gaze snapped back to his, something flickering in her expression. Something fragile, something she had guarded for too long. "No," she admitted. "But it is necessary." Isaac thought about that for a moment. He had never known what it was like to be truly alone. Even in his solitude, there had always been the option of returning to people, to human connection. But for her, it was different. It wasn't a choice, it was survival. "Maybe it doesn't have to be," he said finally. She studied him, as if waiting for him to laugh, to reveal some hidden mockery in his words. But he only held her gaze, steady and sincere. "I don't even know your name," he added, his voice softer now. She hesitated, then whispered, "Saris." "Saris?" he repeated, letting the name settle on his tongue. "I'm Isaac." Her lips parted slightly, as if tasting his name the way he had tasted hers. Something shifted in her stance, a quiet acceptance, even if she didn't say it aloud. The wind stirred between them, but neither of them moved. For the first time in a long while, Saris did not feel like a creature to be feared. and Isaac did not feel like a man standing before the unknown. They were just two beings, standing under the same sky trying to understand. The days that followed were unlike anything Isaac had ever experienced. Saris didn't disappear into the shadows after that first night. She lingered at the edge of the forest, watching him, waiting. It became a silent understanding between them. He would return to the lake each evening, and she would be there. They never spoke of it as a ritual, yet it became one all the same. At first, their conversations were cautious, each word measured like a bridge stretched over uncertain ground. Saris was guarded, her responses short, clipped. But Isaac was patient. He knew what fear did to people, what loneliness did. He let her take her time. One evening, as the sky bled into deep purples and golds, Saris stood closer than she had before. The glow of her skin reflected on the water, casting strange patterns. "You do not ask me what I am," she said suddenly. Isaac glanced at her, surprised. "Would you tell me if I did?" She tilted her head, considering. "No." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Then I won't ask." She studied him in that way she always did, intense, unblinking, as though peeling back layers of his mind. "Your people would demand answers. They would fear what I am." "I'm not my people," Isaac said simply. Something shifted in her expression, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something close to it. "Then what are you?" she asked. Isaac thought about that for a moment. "Someone who isn't afraid of you." Saris blinked, her gaze flickering downward. It was the first time he had seen her hesitate, as if she didn't quite know what to do with his words. She took a step closer. Isaac didn't move, didn't flinch, as she lifted her hand again. It was the same gesture as before, the same quiet request. He reached out without hesitation, their palms meeting. The rush of sensation came again, but this time it wasn't overwhelming. It was softer, more controlled. He saw glimpses of her world, of a sky far darker than Earth's, of structures that seemed to pulse like living things, of a loneliness so deep it carved itself into her very being. And beneath it all, he felt her searching for something. Acceptance. Belonging. Saris inhaled sharply and pulled her hand back as if burned. You do not fear this?" "No," Isaac said, steady. "Because it's you." Her breath hitched. A small sound, barely there, but enough for him to notice. Slowly, carefully, Saris reached for his hand again. This time she held on longer. The nights passed in a rhythm neither of them spoke about but both understood. Isaac and Saris met by the lake, exchanging words that grew less cautious, more open. She told him small things, never about where she came from, never about why she was alone, but about the way the stars looked different in her sky, the way her body reacted to Earth's atmosphere, the way human emotions fascinated and confused her all at once. Isaac, in turn, told her about his world. Not the world that humans had claimed, but the world as he saw it. The quiet moments. The way the leaves turned in autumn. The feeling of warm sand under bare feet. The things he thought she would appreciate, not the things she would fear. One evening, as they sat by the water's edge, he caught Saris watching him. Not just with curiosity, but with something deeper, something unspoken. "You look at me like I'm the strange one," he said, teasing. Saris blinked as if caught. "You are strange, Isaac." He smirked. "How so?" She hesitated, then said, "You do not fear me, yet you should. You do not demand answers, yet you should. And you—" her voice softened, almost uncertain. "You make me feel things I do not understand." Isaac's breath stilled for a moment. The weight of her words hung between them, delicate and dangerous. "What do you feel?" he asked, voice low. Saris turned her gaze to the lake, her reflection shimmering alongside his. "I do not know what to call it in your language." He leaned slightly closer. "Try me." She was silent for a long time, as if battling herself. Then, so quietly he almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "Safe." Isaac felt something inside him shift, something irreversible. He reached for her hand again, not as an experiment, not as a question, but as an answer. And this time she didn't pull away. As the nights turned to weeks, something unspoken grew between them. The space between them lessened. Her touch lingered longer. The silences stretched not from discomfort, but from understanding. One night, she arrived at the lake with something different in her eyes. "I must show you something," Sarah said. Isaac rose from where he had been sitting. "All right." She extended her hand, not just for contact, but for trust. He took it. The world around them blurred. A sensation like being lifted, weightless yet grounded, filled his body. And then, stars. Not the ones above them, not the sky he had always known. These stars were different, closer, moving like living things. The landscape around him was unlike anything he had seen before. Strange structures that pulsed with a faint glow, air that tasted unfamiliar yet alive. He turned to Sarah's, realization dawning. "This is my home," she finished. Isaac looked around in awe, in quiet reverence. "It's beautiful." Saris was watching him, searching his face for something. It was. He turned to her, sensing the ache in her voice. "What happened?" Her fingers curled slightly against his. "I was meant to bond with my kind, but I did not. I left before they could force it upon me." Isaac frowned. Bond. A connection deeper than thought, deeper than the self. It is forever. His heart pounded. "And you didn't want that?" Saris looked at him, and for the first time, there was something unmistakable in her gaze. Something vulnerable, something human. "No," she murmured. "I wanted to choose." Isaac swallowed. The weight of her words pressed against his chest, against something he hadn't dared to admit to himself until now. "And now?" he asked carefully. Saris stepped closer, so close he could feel the warmth of her body despite the cool night air. "Now, I do not wish to be alone." Isaac reached up, brushing a strand of silken, glowing hair from her face. "You're not." And then, in the quiet of an unfamiliar world, under the watchful eyes of distant stars, she made her choice. She chose him. The decision was made in silence, but its weight pressed against them in every glance, every lingering touch. Saris had chosen him. Not because of fate, not because of duty, but because she wanted to. And yet, the world would not make it easy. They returned to Earth, to the quiet sanctuary of the lake, but something had changed between them. The space that had once held uncertainty now crackled with an energy neither of them knew how to name. It was not just closeness anymore, it was need. Isaac felt it in the way Saris stood nearer than before, in the way her fingers brushed against his arm when she spoke. He saw it in her eyes when she looked at him, that deep, searching gaze that once sought fear and now sought something else entirely. But Saris was not human, and Isaac was not an alien. The world had never intended for them to fit together. One evening, as they sat side by side, the sky dark with a storm that had yet to break, Isaac finally voiced the question that had haunted him since the moment she showed him her home. "What happens now?" Saris turned to him, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You left your people because they wanted to force a bond you didn't choose. You chose me instead." He hesitated. "But what does that mean?" Saris studied him for a long time before she spoke. "In my world, a bond is eternal. It is not a ceremony, not a ritual. It is deeper than that." Isaac swallowed, his pulse quickening. "Deeper how?" She reached for his hand, and the moment her skin touched his, he felt it. The echo of something vast and unspoken. A connection that pulsed beneath his ribs like a second heartbeat. He inhaled sharply. "Saris." She held on tighter. "I do not know if a human can withstand it." The words sent a shiver through him, not of fear, but of something heavier, something dangerous and intoxicating. "What if I can?" he asked. Saris's expression shifted, something like hope, something like hesitation. "Then there is no turning back." Isaac reached up, gently cupping her face. "I don't want to turn back." She exhaled, and he could feel the tremor in her breath, the weight of the choice she was about to make. Then, with deliberate slowness, she pressed her forehead to his. The world tilted. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. An aching, endless silence that wrapped around him like the depth of space itself. And then, fire, light, stars collapsing into themselves. Isaac gasped, gripping onto her as the force of it consumed him. He could see her memories, her thoughts, her very essence intertwining with his. There was no distinction between past and present, no barrier between his emotions and hers. He could feel her loneliness, her longing, the way she had drifted through the universe without a tether, until now, until him, and in return she saw him. The weight of every decision, every regret, every quiet moment of solitude he had never spoken aloud. He felt her hands shaking against his. Isaac! He steadied her. I'm here. The bond sealed itself between them, not with a word, not with a ceremony, but with the quiet certainty that they were no longer two separate beings. They belonged to each other now. When Saris finally pulled back, her eyes shone with something new, something fierce and certain. It is done, she whispered. Isaac smiled, breathless, awed. So, does this mean we're married now? Saris blinked, tilting her head. Married, he chuckled. It's what humans do when they decide to spend their lives together. She considered for a moment. A human ritual for an alien bond. Isaac shrugged. Why not both? Saris was quiet. Then she nodded, something like a smile tugging at the edges of her lips. Then, by your custom and mine, she murmured. I am yours. Isaac laced his fingers through hers, feeling the steady pulse of their connection thrumming between them. And I'm yours, he promised. Above them, the storm finally broke, rain falling around them like a blessing. The rain fell in heavy sheets, cool against Isaac's skin, but he barely noticed it. His focus was entirely on Saris, on the way she stood so close, her glowing eyes searching his face, as if confirming that he was still real, still there. He squeezed her hand, the warmth of her touch grounding him despite the vast, uncharted depth of what had just happened between them. He could still feel the echo of her emotions inside him, a soft, pulsing presence in the back of his mind. It wasn't intrusive, but it was there, like a second heartbeat, tethering them together. Saris's lips parted slightly as if she, too, was adjusting to this new reality. Is this what it is like for humans? Isaac tilted his head. What do you mean? She hesitated, her free hand pressing lightly against her chest. To be connected, to feel another's thoughts, their emotions, their very existence intertwined with your own. Isaac considered her words. Humans weren't telepathic like she was, but love, in its own way, was just as consuming. It was knowing someone's fears without them speaking, understanding their joy simply by the way they looked at you. It was something unseen yet deeply felt, just as he felt her now. Not like this, he admitted, but we have our own way of connecting. Maybe not as intense as what we just did, but when we love someone, we feel them, even when they're not there. Saris's fingers curled against his. Then, this is love? Isaac smiled, his heart hammering at the quiet vulnerability in her voice. I think so. She blinked up at him, her expression unreadable for a long moment. Then, with slow deliberation, she stepped even closer until her body was pressed lightly against his. Her warmth seeped into him despite the cool rain, and he swallowed hard, acutely aware of every point where they touched. Isaac, she murmured, her voice barely audible over the downpour. Yes. Saris reached up, her fingers brushing against his jaw, a hesitant yet deliberate touch. You said humans have rituals for bonding. He exhaled, his pulse quickening. Yeah. Marriage is one of them. She traced the curve of his cheek, as if memorizing him. I wish to do this, the way your people do. Isaac's breath caught. You mean you want to get married? Like a real wedding? Saris nodded. If I am to live in your world, I wish to embrace its customs. And if this is the way your kind declares devotion, I wish to do it with you. Isaac felt his chest tighten, a rush of emotions so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. Just weeks ago, she had been a mystery, an untouchable presence from the stars. Now, she was standing before him, asking to be his in a way both human and alien. He grinned, shaking his head in disbelief. You really are full of surprises. You know that? Saris arched a delicate brow. Is that a yes? Isaac let out a breathless laugh. Yeah, it's a yes. For the first time, Saris smiled. A real, unguarded smile, full of something bright and beautiful. And as the rain poured around them, Isaac knew without a doubt, this was only the beginning. The wedding was unlike anything Earth had ever seen. Isaac had expected it to be complicated. After all, how did one plan a wedding between a human and an alien? But Saris had been determined. She wanted this not just as a gesture, but as a promise, one that merged both of their worlds. And so, they created something new. The ceremony was held by the lake where they had first met, the water still and endless beneath a sky filled with stars. The human guests, Isaac's friends, a handful of family members, watched in awe as Saris's people arrived, their sleek, luminescent forms stepping from the shadows of their ships. They did not often venture to Earth, but for her they had come, not to interfere but to witness. Saris stood before Isaac, her usual battle-worn armor replaced with something softer, silken fabric that shimmered like liquid silver, flowing around her body in a way that made her seem almost weightless. Her luminous eyes met his, searching, as if grounding herself in his presence. Isaac had never been one for formal wear, but tonight he wore a suit simple, classic. He had laughed when Saris first saw him in it, the way her eyes had widened in something close to admiration. You approve? He had teased. Saris had tilted her head. It is strange to see you like this. Different. Good different. A pause, then the soft brush of her fingers against his wrist. Yes. Now, as they stood together, the night thick with quiet anticipation, Isaac realized he had never felt more certain of anything in his life. The officiant, a longtime friend of Isaac's who had eagerly agreed to perform the ceremony, despite its unprecedented nature, cleared his throat and began. We gather here tonight for something that has never happened before. A bond not just between two people, but between two worlds. A murmur ran through the crowd. The humans watched with curiosity, the aliens with quiet reverence. Saris took a slow breath. On my world, she said, her voice steady. A bond is eternal. It is not spoken, not written, it is felt. But I have chosen to speak it for him. Isaac swallowed hard. He had expected vows, but hearing them from her, it made his chest tighten in a way he couldn't explain. Saris turned to face him fully, reaching for his hands. Her grip was firm, grounding. You are not like me, she said softly. And yet you are the one I trust most. You are the one I seek when I do not understand. The one I long for when I am alone. I have lived among the stars, seen countless worlds, but I have never found a place that felt like home, until you. Isaac exhaled shakily. He could feel the weight of her words settling into his bones. Saris tilted her head. Is this the part where you speak? A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the humans in the crowd, but Isaac barely noticed. He was too busy trying to remember how to breathe. He squeezed her hands, his thumbs brushing over her skin. Yeah, he murmured. Yeah, this is my part. He took a steadying breath. Saris, when I met you, I didn't know what to think. You were terrifying, and beautiful, and completely impossible. And yet, somehow, you became the most important person in my life. Her fingers tightened around his. I don't care that we're different. I don't care that we don't come from the same world. All I care about is this. He brought her hands to his chest, right over his heart. You. And whatever comes next. Saris blinked, her gaze flickering with something warm, something vulnerable. The officiant cleared his throat again, smiling. Well, that was definitely the most unique set of vows I've ever heard. A few chuckles rippled through the humans in the audience. Even Saris's people seemed intrigued, though their expressions were harder to read. The officiant continued. With those words, I now pronounce you, husband and wife? He glanced at Saris uncertainly. Or, whatever your term for this would be? Saris considered for a moment, then turned back to Isaac. We do not have a word for this. Isaac smiled. Then we'll make one up later. The officiant chuckled. All right then. Isaac, you may now kiss your bride. The moment stretched between them electric. Saris tilted her head slightly. A kiss. This is. Isaac didn't let her finish. He closed the distance between them, pressing his lips to hers in a slow, deliberate kiss. He could feel the moment she fully gave in, the way she melted into him, her fingers curling against his chest. A soft, collective gasp rippled through the alien guests. To them, this was an unfamiliar gesture, intimate in a way they had never witnessed before. But Saris didn't care. She kissed him back, her hands tightening around him as if she never intended to let go. When they finally broke apart, Isaac pressed his forehead against hers, breathless. Well, he murmured. I think that makes it official. Saris exhaled a soft, almost laugh. Yes, official. The applause started with the humans first, a joyous, celebratory sound that soon spread, hesitant at first, to the aliens as well. Saris's people did not fully understand human customs, but they understood devotion when they saw it. And tonight they had witnessed something that defied logic, something that should not have been possible. And yet it was. As the night stretched on, the celebration blurred into something surreal. Humans and aliens alike mingled cautiously, watching each other with a mixture of curiosity and awe. Saris stood beside Isaac, her fingers still laced with his. Did we just change the universe? He asked, half joking. She turned to him, her eyes bright with something unspoken. Perhaps, she murmured, but I do not care for the universe tonight. She leaned closer, the glow of her skin reflecting in his eyes. Tonight, there is only you. And for Isaac, that was more than enough. The night had long faded into quiet, the celebrations winding down as the guests, both human and alien, slowly departed. The lake was still, reflecting the starlit sky above, a silent witness to the impossible love that had just been sealed. Isaac stood at the water's edge, his fingers still twined with Saris's. The cool night breeze whispered around them, carrying the distant hum of alien ships departing, mingled with the fading laughter of his friends. It had happened. They were married. Saris turned to him, her glowing eyes soft in the dim light. Your people have a saying, she murmured. Happily ever after. Isaac smiled, squeezing her hand. Yeah, they do. She tilted her head, watching him with quiet curiosity. Is that what this is? Isaac exhaled, glancing up at the endless sky above them. Everything had changed, his world, his future, the very fabric of what was possible. But standing here with her at his side, none of it felt uncertain. It's not the end of the story, he said at last. But it's a damn good beginning. Saris studied him for a long moment, then, slowly, deliberately, she leaned in, pressing her forehead against his. A gesture that, for her kind, meant something deep, something sacred. And what comes next? She whispered. Isaac smiled, brushing his lips against hers in the softest of kisses. Whatever we want, he murmured. And together, hand in hand, they stepped into the unknown, ready to write the next chapter of their impossible love story.